Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. On the very first week of 2026, a major event took place, which was hardly predictable. When annual assessments were published at the turn of the year, the American operation in Venezuela. While not necessarily affecting Israel directly, it speaks to the difficulty in outlining strategic challenges throughout the year. In January of 2023, and indeed in September of that year, there was no forewarning of October 7th. Having said all that, it makes sense to try and freeze frame of Israel's strategic landscape as far as the eye can see. Joining us to dissect this matter and to try and analyze the year ahead, nonetheless, are Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. Next to him, Colonel, retired, Dr. Eran Lerman, formerly the Deputy National Security Advisor of Israel, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate as well. Right. And last but certainly not least, our TV7 Editor-at-Large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, your predictions usually tend to conflict themselves, even though they sometimes come true, even if it doesn't immediately happen. What can you tell us about the complexities moving forward ahead? Naturally, the Islamic Republic of Iran is still on the table. Gaza, Lebanon, Turkey being a new actor, not necessarily new, but a new actor to consider in broader terms. And Syria, of course, is still very fluid. What should we focus on to start with?
Am I allowed to predict retroactively? Because in the rear view mirror, it becomes clearer. Now, except for the very first war, which Israel had at its establishment, all others were either unexpected or initiated by Israel. So the fact that right now, all of the threats against Israel, facing Israel, are dormant, means nothing. The sleeping could wake up at any moment. It does seem right now that we are in a sort of respite. It's the lull between the storms. Iran, either defensively or offensively, could trigger another regional campaign, if not war. Lebanon could erupt, Hezbollah. In Gaza, Hamas, facing with a determined push to disarm it, could try to at least suck Israel into a bloody war of attrition. The Houthis could then join. So take your pick. All of the above, any of the above.
Let's start with Gaza. Dr. Lerman.
Well, just to echo what Amir just said, I think it was Yogi Berra who said the prediction is very difficult, particularly about the future, and never more so than our current situation in Gaza, which is extremely paradoxical. Israel is clearly the dominant player, 53% of the Gaza Strip, but almost entirely without population, is under Israeli control. Hamas is consolidating its grip on what is left, but it is a fragile organization that I believe can actually be overthrown militarily, whether by an external intervention through the ISF, which is extremely unlikely, or an Israeli operation, whether it will be a one-blow thing or a creeping push of Hamas into a smaller and smaller enclave. Both can be done. Neither is actually urgently needed because Hamas right now is in no position to constitute an effective threat to any specific Israeli lives or interests, because the IDF is all around it. The yellow area controlled by the IDF extends from Rafah all the way to the northern part of Gaza, surrounding the Hamas controlled area. The sea lanes are under Israeli control. And so the ability to prevent any serious buildup beyond what they can produce from their own very limited resources is there. And so there are basically four options. One is that the present situation will be actually perpetuated in one way or the other, deep into the future. Somehow, I don't think that this is an acceptable result politically and morally, and not only for Israel, but for all in the region who want to see the Islamists defeated. But essentially, it could happen if no further action takes place. At the other extreme is an Israeli all-out offensive. A third option that the American administration and the CMCC seem to be working on is the ability to create in the Israeli control an alternative for the Gazans so they can move over from the Hamas-controlled areas to a better life, better housing, better provisions than those that Hamas can offer them and will be able to offer them. And in this way, Hamas authority will be undermined. It seems a plausible proposition, but since Hamas are likely to shoot those who try to leave, it may actually be more of a wishful thinking. And the fourth option, as I said, is for Israel to slowly and systematically eat at what is left of Hamas by letting the ISF at its own very slow pace, first emerge and be formed and then take over in areas Israel will control. These are essentially the options. The choices, I have to say, will probably be colored by the fact that 26 is also going to be an election year in Israel. And what will be deemed by the government to be effective with the electorate is going to be very much part of the decision-making.
According to all polls right now, it seems that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is leading at this stage. Of course, it doesn't mean much since it's very early in this year, but nonetheless, also all those same polls predict that a coalition is highly unlikely to emerge, or at least there is still a very large gap in that context.
The present coalition is not viable anymore.
It's not viable anymore, indeed. Well, General Sofrin, let's remain in the southern sector. Two actors to take into account. One, the Houthis in Yemen. Yemen is, of course, faced with developments of its own, also animosity between the Emiratis and the Saudis, which is also of significance, and the implications also to the Strait of Hormuz. Bab el-Mandeb and the implications to Egypt, which is heavily reliant on those waterways being free and open, and all of this also, of course, has direct impact from the Gaza Strip. Map it out for us, please.
Let us begin with the Houthis. The Houthis supported the fighting in Gaza as long as it was going on. The moment a ceasefire was declared, they stopped launching rockets and missiles and UAVs into Israel. And they said, we are now reorganizing, we are now building our capacity one more time. If a war is going to break down one more time in Gaza, we are going to engage Israel, just like we did before. They don't even engage vessels are now moving in the Red Sea, either to Suez Canal or to the area of, or to the Eilat port, which was paralyzed for almost 2 years. And now it is going to be reopened. Mm-hmm. Due to the fact that vessels can get freely to get this, and the shipping companies are now taking advantage of that and beginning to go back into the Red Sea, just like they did before 2 years ago. That means that the Houthis are still valid and they still have the power. And if something is going to happen in Gaza, as long as they interpret what is happening in Gaza as engagement of Israelis with Hamas, and of course Palestinians living in Gaza, they will engage Israel. And they will try to hit vessels moving along the Red Sea. Now regarding Egypt, Egypt was affected very badly due to the fact that vessels moving into Suez Canal were down about 50% comparing to what used to be before the war broke out. But if you look what was the Egyptian response, nothing. They didn't even try to challenge the Houthis or to try to convince them to allow vessels to go into Suez Canal, and they suffered a lot of losses.
How do you explain that? Since there was the establishment of Task Force 153, which was a joint Egyptian-American task force of naval capacity. I mean, they had a number of serious assets in the region, plenty of joint exercises, with the focus of this specific scenario, and yet nothing happened.
I think that if you look at this task force, it was not really matching the threat that came out from the Houthis. They could not face all the threats. It was not what we call the proper response for what used to for the weapon system that the Houthis used against vessels, against whoever needed. I think this is the main problem, and they learned a lot of lessons out of that. Even the European task force suffered the same casualties due to that fact that they didn't enough matching defense systems that can face the threats coming on from Yemen. The second issue is what happens on the southern part of Yemen, where there is a conflict between the Saudis and the Emirates to try to support and to establish some entity in the southern part of Yemen, and this of course has an effect on the Houthis itself. Now the Houthis are being supported by the Iranians still, even though they produce their own capabilities and own weapon systems, they receive enough supply coming out from Iran. And that means that this is a player that should be taken into consideration if and when we're going to think about or plan something in Gaza. We have to take into consideration that you should engage the Yemens as well, the Houthis in Yemen as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Oren, let's divert somewhat to the Saudi-Emirati issue, because I think that there are far-reaching implications for this. Today, anyone I speak to in the Middle East, be it in Turkey or other countries in the region, they equate Israel with the Emiratis. They always establish a focused discussion of the way to Jerusalem is through the Emiratis, through Doha, Abu Dhabi. You see those complexities emerge in the discourse, and the Saudis, which were a significant candidate to join the Abraham Accords, have pretty much lost interest, and they're seeing this relationship between Israel and the Emiratis as potentially a problem even.
The United Arab Emirates is probably the biggest success story of the post-British period, because there were 7 small sultanates, sheikdoms, oildoms, whatever you want to call them, and they managed to federate and become very successful and challenge the Saudi supremacy of the Arabian Gulf, because prior to that, Saudi Arabia was the uncrowned king of all of these small Arab monarchies. Now, they have their own interests. You know, it's Abu Dhabi vis-a-vis Dubai. Part of it is the administration, part of it is the financial capital. We don't have to go into that, but technologically, they are even more developed than Saudi Arabia. And they have their own interests in Yemen. Yemen has been, of course, traditionally a thorn in Saudi Arabia's side. And Israel's interest started to go parallel with the Saudi interests in the 60s. Later, of course, King Faisal was so adamant in trying to be the guardian of the holy sites in Jerusalem that the relationship soured. And Faisal's support of Sadat was one of the main causes for the 1973 war. The Emirates were not even born there, almost.
Just
in
born.
1971. So there is no bad blood between Jerusalem and Dubai. With Riyadh, there was. Regarding Yemen, or what is now happening in Somaliland, Israel and the UAE are on the same page. And the UAE were never asked to commit to the Palestinian cause, even verbally. Of course, they were against annexation. But other than that, they're happy with Israeli policy as it is. But also, all of the GCC countries were against Qatar. This is another...
Still are.
Still are, yes, but when we talk about the triangle there, it's the Saudis and the Emiratis against Qatar. All of them are perhaps against other rivals.
Well, during the previous Trump administration, the Americans managed to broker a reconciliation pact. Of course, that reconciliation pact stemmed from a Qatari pledge to forego its support for the Muslim Brotherhood, where the father, who was regarded or identified as a strong or stout supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, would take a back seat, and his son Tamim, which is in Hebrew it translates to naive.
He's not.
He is undoubtedly not naive when it comes to the Muslim Brotherhood or any of the other activities. Continues to do so. Nevertheless, it seems that right now interests are as such that relations continue to foster. But nonetheless, let's move to a joint threat that continues to hover over the entire region, namely the Islamic Republic of Iran. Dr. Lerman.
Well, the Islamic Republic of Iran has gone into a serious crisis. We tend to focus on the demonstrations, but they are the manifestation of a condition which has changed fundamentally. The rate of the rial to the dollar. I mean, if you people in Iran have been bragging that they defeated Israel somehow, and we had many more casualties than we actually claim. Of course, that's an absurdity. If you know Israeli society, you cannot hide a single casualty. But that they won the war in June. Now, look at what happened to the shekel and to the rial. The shekel is closing in on less than 3 to the dollar. That's to say it's rising in the world, while the rial has gone to 1.45 million to the dollar. It means that their currency has become dust, like Germany's in the 1920s.
And Italy.
And
Italy after the Second World War.
And the liret. Yes.
Not a good omen for the world.
Not a good omen for the Iranian people, for sure. It's no longer a question of chicken, as they used to say. It's a question of water in the faucet.
When a square of a toilet paper roll is worth more than a bill, it says something.
Which means, yes, and bills are not very useful. The point is, when this happens, the regime has a problem no longer just with the intellectuals of the elite in northern Tehran. It has already spread to the bazaar. If it spreads to Islam Shah, if it spreads to the southern suburbs, the mass of poor Iranians are without water and without proper management of the city. Even President Pezeshkian admits that Tehran is no longer a manageable city, and you have to move the capital elsewhere. When this is the situation, compounded by the snapback, that's to say that the Europeans who reserved judgment on Trump's decision in 2018 to resume sanctions, have now moved after the war to join the Americans in the sanction system. And with Russia now engaged with the United States on Ukraine, and with China having other fish to fry, the Iranian regime is in a much more problematic position than it has ever been. And we shall have to see how this actually translates into political change. I would say this, it is a totally non-linear proposition. It's not like something just happening step by step. It could be very dramatic, very swift, and it will happen the moment the IRGC regular troops, not ideologically driven young besiegers, but the regular troop of the IRGC will refuse to shoot. That's where the regime cracks.
And it seems that there are some sparks of statements, particularly from the military rather than the RGC, but nonetheless, it is carrying over. General Sofrin, the Iranians since Qasem Soleimani have not really shown appetite for a new strategy to confront the West or Israel in particular, and the elimination in 2019 was, or rather early 2020, was a lot more significant than some may have attributed to it. Post October 7th and the 7th Front War, which the Iranians technically launched against Israel, it seems like the Iranians are trying to rehabilitate it rather than look at alternative means, so to speak. What are we to take out of that from a regional perspective? We see what's happening in Iraq. Syria is gone for the Iranians, even though the infrastructure is still very much there. They do not really have access to that infrastructure so long as the Americans are there. And then Lebanon, Jordan is still under a lot of threat. What can you tell us about that briefly, please?
When Qasem Soleimani passed away, or was sent away, in a way, he succeeded in establishing the ring of fire around Israel, meaning to join all the proxies, to arm them, to finance them, to train them, to be able to engage Israel if and when needed, and they did so at the beginning of this war, on 2023. Ismail Kani, who replaced him, is a weaker person than Qasem Soleimani was. He also just maintained what was built by Qasem Soleimani. He didn't add any added value, but he kept what was built as it is. And that was enough at the first phase of this war. Now, after the war, and during the attack of Rising Lion on June, none of the proxies interfere in the favor of Iran. None of them try to assist the Iranians. Not only that, even their biggest allies, like Russia and China, didn't raise a finger.
Except for the Houthis, who launched 18 projectiles, was it?
That was nothing.
Right.
That was nothing, really. even less than that. But nevertheless, Iran faced alone this attack of June 2025 without any assistance. Now, they try to rebuild their own capacity. Now they have problems, of course, because Hezbollah in Lebanon is isolated. You cannot anymore use what we call the Syrian terrain in order to deliver weapon systems. They do it in other ways. They use small vehicles to deliver weapon systems to less extent. The Hezbollah is rearming itself by its own capabilities, own production, and maintaining those capabilities so far. And nobody's going to rearm, to dismantling the Hezbollah, because nobody's very capable of doing so. Only us, of course, but we're not going to launch probably another war into Lebanon right now. On the other hand, in Iraq, the militias are still valid, even though to a less extent than it used to be before, and less commitment to the Iranian regime, but they are there. And they can be activated in order to launch UAVs or something else into Israel, just like they did before. The Houthis, of course, are still there, and they use all the weapon systems they have, if and when Israel is going to renew its war in Gaza. Now, if you combine all that, means that the Iranians are trying to still maintain this kind of ring of fire, even to a lesser extent than it used to be before, and less capabilities than they used to have before, but without trying to find another, what we call a winning card, that in the end will defeat Israel. And we have to take into consideration one more issue that we didn't touch so far, is Judea and Samaria. In Jordan, Samaria, they invest a lot of efforts trying to deliver a lot of weapon systems and to build capabilities inside the Jordan and Samaria. Even though we are making a lot of efforts to deny any attacks, but still some attacks are coming out from Jordan and Samaria and killing Israelis and wounding Israelis and causing damage. It's not over yet. And you have to invest, and even now when the government is going to plan to demolish or to cancel what was being done during the disengagement of 2005 on the northern part of Samaria and to rebuild the new settlements, is going to demand a lot of units to be deployed there and to try to defend the settlers that are living there.
And it's very important to maintain our relationship with Jordan because we have a common interest in not allowing the Iranians to use Jordan as a launching pad.
And it seems like the Jordanians are playing here with different actors in the region that counter Israeli interests at times. Nevertheless, Israel does need to maintain those relations and swallow a lot of anyways.
Rhetoric, anyway.
Rhetoric, yes. Mr. Oren, closing sentence, 2026, round it up.
After the failure of the armistice agreements of 1949, Israel wanted to move from war to peace. Came Nixon and Kissinger standing to step by step. This is going to be the method now. In Lebanon, south of the Litani, then the rest. In Gaza, step by step, stabilization, perhaps disarming Hamas, at least from its heavier weapons.
Thank you, Mr. Oren, General Sofrin, and Dr. Lerman. Thank you very much for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. To our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.
Jerusalem Studio, now available on Spotify.